It's a summer night, maybe 70,000 BC. The air is warm, thick, humming with insects. You've been walking since before dawn, hunting across open savannah under a sun that showed absolutely no mercy. Your feet are destroyed. Your shoulders ache. Every muscle in your body is sending the same clear message. Lie down, close your eyes, stop existing for a few hours. And yet, you crawl toward the fire, not away from it, toward it. On a night when the last thing any reasonable creature would want is more heat, you pull yourself as close to those flames as you can get without catching your hair on fire. Curl up in the smoke, and that's where you sleep. This is not a small detail. This is one of the most consistent behaviors in the entire archaeological and anthropological record of early humans. Across continents, across hundreds of thousands of years, across every climate zone humans ever occupied, they slept next to fire. In winter, sure, that makes obvious sense, but in summer too. In the tropics, in regions where nighttime temperatures never even came close to dangerous, where warmth was the last thing anyone needed. So the easy answer, the one that sounds like common sense, the one most people assume without ever really thinking about it, is wrong. Or at least radically incomplete. Fire wasn't just a heater. If it were, humans would have moved away from it the moment the seasons changed. They didn't. So something else was going on. Something older, deeper, and honestly a lot more interesting than keeping warm. Here's what makes this genuinely strange. Humans are the only large mammal that sleeps in the open with a fire burning. Every other animal on the planet treats fire as what it obviously is. An immediate, unambiguous signal of danger. When animals in the wild detect smoke or flame, they leave, quickly. That response is so hardwired, so universal across species, that it goes back hundreds of millions of years to a time before mammals even existed. Fire equals threat. Get out. And yet our ancestors did the opposite. They made fire. They maintained it through the night. They slept beside it, intentionally. At some point in the deep past, the human relationship with fire flipped from the universal animal instinct of run away to something that has no parallel in the rest of the natural world. Come closer, stay close, build it bigger. That flip didn't happen overnight. It took hundreds of thousands of years of living alongside fire, learning it, understanding it, domesticating it in a sense long before we domesticated any animal or plant. Controlled fire use in the archaeological record goes back at least a million years, possibly longer. A million years of sitting next to flames every night leaves marks. On the bones, on the brain, on the behavior. But here's the question that nobody asks enough. If warmth was the main point, why did the behavior continue on warm nights? Why didn't humans simply build a fire, cook their food, let it die down, and then move a comfortable distance away to sleep? Why stay right there, in the smoke, in the heat, until morning? The answer isn't one thing. It turns out it's several things layered on top of each other, each one more surprising than the last. And when you put them together, they don't just explain why ancient humans slept next to fire in summer. They explain something fundamental about why humans became the kind of creature we are at all. Because the fire wasn't just warming bodies, it was doing something to the night itself. It was changing what the darkness meant. And that, it turns out, changed everything. Picture the African savannah after dark. No moon tonight. The kind of darkness that doesn't exist anywhere in the modern world, where there's always a street light, a phone screen, a glow from somewhere. This is absolute darkness. The kind where you genuinely cannot see your hand in front of your face. And the darkness is not empty. Leopards are crepuscular and nocturnal hunters, meaning they do their best work exactly when you're trying to sleep. Hyenas operate in packs after sundown with jaws powerful enough to crush bone like dry wood. Lions, which look lazy and slow during the day, become something entirely different at night. Patient, coordinated, capable of covering ground in silence that has no business existing in an animal that large. African wild dogs, cave bears depending on the region, giant short-faced bears in the Americas, dire wolves, saber-toothed cats across multiple continents. The list of things that wanted to eat early humans, and were specifically built to do. That hunting at night is genuinely sobering. Here's the number that puts it in perspective. Researchers who study predator-prey relationships in modern Africa estimate that the majority of large predator attacks on primates happen between dusk and dawn. Not because predators sleep during the day exactly, but because darkness eliminates the primary defensive advantage that primates have always had. The ability to see a threat coming and react before it arrives. Remove the light and you remove the warning system. Remove the warning system and a sleeping human is just a slow, mostly hairless, surprisingly easy meal lying on the ground. Fire changed that equation completely. The light alone was significant. A sustained fire visible from a distance tells every predator in the area the same thing. Something is awake over there. Something is aware. Predators, even apex predators, are fundamentally risk-averse when it comes to hunting. They don't want to fight. They want an easy kill. A fire signals the opposite of easy. It signals alertness, unpredictability, the possibility that approaching means getting hurt. Most large predators, when they detect firelight, don't investigate. They route around it and find something easier. But here's what's even more interesting than the light: the smoke. Modern researchers studying wild chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, have documented something that initially surprised everyone. Chimps show no instinctive fear of fire. They don't run from controlled flames. They watch them, approach them cautiously, sometimes sit near them for extended periods. What they respond to, strongly and immediately, is smoke. Smoke triggers the deep ancient flight response in a way that visible flame alone doesn't, which means that sleeping in the smoke, something that sounds like a miserable choice from a modern comfort standpoint, was actually a highly effective predator deterrent. A camp wrapped in wood smoke smells wrong to every large carnivore that might consider approaching. It masks human scent, which predators use to locate prey in darkness. It creates a chemical boundary around the sleeping group that is invisible but functionally real. And it gets more specific than that. Researchers working with contemporary hunter-gatherer groups in Africa have documented that certain woods were selected for nighttime fires, not just based on availability or heat output, but based on the quality and quantity of smoke they produced. People weren't just burning whatever was around. They were making choices, curating the smoke, managing the invisible perimeter around their sleeping bodies with a level of intentionality that we would never guess from looking at the archaeological record alone. Think about what that implies for the timeline. If people were actively selecting wood for smoke quality, that's not a primitive behavior. That's applied chemistry. That's accumulated knowledge passed across generations about which plants produce which effects. That's a technology, just not one that leaves artifacts behind in the way that stone tools do. So the fire burning through a warm summer night wasn't a comfort habit or a failure to think it through. It was a security system, a perimeter, a way of making the darkness survivable in a world where the darkness genuinely, regularly, lethally was not. The predators shaped human sleep. And fire was the answer. Here's something that almost never makes it into the standard story about fire. The sun goes down, and early humans still have hours before sleep. Hours that, without fire, would be spent in absolute darkness doing essentially nothing. You can't hunt in that darkness. You can't gather food. You can't make tools with any precision. You can't do much of anything except wait, quietly, hoping nothing finds you in the dark. Fire eliminated that dead zone entirely. The anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent years living with and studying the Kungsan people of the Kalahari, one of the most extensively documented hunter-gatherer societies on Earth. She recorded thousands of hours of conversation, carefully categorizing what people talked about and when. The results were striking in a way that reframed everything we thought we understood about fire and human social development. During the day, conversations were almost entirely practical. Where to hunt? Who saw what tracks? Which plants were ready to harvest? Conflict resolution, resource allocation, immediate logistics. Useful, necessary, unglamorous. At night, around the fire, everything changed. Nighttime conversations were dominated by stories. Not gossip, not complaints, not practical planning. Stories about people who weren't there. Stories about events that happened somewhere else, or long ago, or in a world that existed only in the telling. Stories about what things meant, who people were, what the rules of the world actually were beneath the surface of daily survival. Wiesner described the firelight hours as when the social and spiritual life of the group happened, when identity was constructed. When knowledge was transmitted across generations, not as a list of facts, but as narrative, as character, as lived experience compressed into something memorable enough to survive decades in a human mind without a single written word. This is not a small thing. This is actually enormous. Neuroscience has spent the last 2 decades documenting what happens to human brains during storytelling, and it turns out the effect is profound and specific. When a person listens to a narrative, their brain doesn't just process language, it synchronizes. Neural activity in the listener begins to mirror neural activity in the speaker, in a phenomenon researchers call neural coupling. The stronger the coupling, the better the comprehension. The deeper the retention, the stronger the sense of connection between the people involved. Shared stories don't just inform, they align. They create a common internal landscape between people who hear them together, a shared version of reality that functions as the foundation of trust in a way that no amount of practical cooperation can replicate on its own. And fire, specifically firelight, appears to create conditions that are unusually favorable for exactly this kind of neural synchronization. The flickering light, the warmth, the low-level hypnotic quality of watching flames, these things together produce a mild but measurable shift in brain state. Attention narrows. The threat monitoring systems that run constantly during daylight hours quiet down slightly. The mind becomes more receptive, more open, more willing to be moved by what it's hearing. The campfire wasn't just where humans told stories. The campfire was why the stories worked the way they did. Now apply that to the question of survival. A group of humans that shares deep narrative knowledge about the world, about which places are dangerous, which plants are poisonous, which strangers can be trusted, which behaviors got someone killed 2 valleys over and 3 winters ago. That group has an information advantage over every other species on the planet. Not because any individual is smarter, but because the group as a whole knows more than any individual could have experienced alone. This is what fire made possible at night, in summer, when warmth was irrelevant. It extended the social day into the darkness. It created a protected, predator-free, cognitively open space where the most important technology humans ever developed, language used to transmit complex knowledge across generations, could operate at full power. The fire wasn't just keeping bodies alive through the night, it was keeping something else alive too. The accumulated knowledge of everyone who had sat around a fire before. Every lesson, every warning, every story that explained why the world worked the way it did. All of it passed forward in the dark, from the people who knew to the people who needed to know, in the one place and the one moment when human minds were most ready to receive it. Take the fire away, and the night goes dark and silent, and the knowledge dies with the people who carry it. Keep it burning, and something larger than any individual survives until morning. Here's the detail that stops people cold when they first hear it. Smoke from a campfire is genuinely bad for you. Not in a vague, long-term modern health anxiety kind of way. in a real immediate measurable way. Wood smoke contains carbon monoxide, particulate matter, benzene, formaldehyde, and a cocktail of other compounds that irritate lung tissue, inflame airways, and with chronic exposure cause exactly the kind of respiratory damage that shortens lives. Researchers studying contemporary populations that cook over open fires indoors document elevated rates of lung disease, cardiovascular problems, and reduced lung function that are serious and well documented. Ancient humans knew fire-produced smoke. They weren't confused about this. They experienced it every single night. They had burning eyes. They coughed. The smell was in their hair, their skin, their clothes, every morning without exception. And they stayed anyway. Which means either they were making a terrible mistake they never figured out across a million years of evidence, which seems unlikely for a species smart enough to colonize every continent on Earth, or the smoke was doing something valuable enough to be worth the cost. It was doing several things. Mosquitoes, which in the ancient world were not a minor annoyance, but a vector for malaria, dengue, yellow fever, and a list of other diseases long enough to constitute a significant portion of total human mortality across history, are exquisitely sensitive to smoke. Studies testing the repellent effect of wood smoke on mosquito populations show reductions in landing rates of between 70 and 90%, depending on wood type and smoke density. A person sleeping in wood smoke is sleeping inside one of the most effective natural insect repellents that exists. A person sleeping 50 feet away from the fire on a pleasant summer night is getting eaten alive and, more importantly, infected. But it goes further than mosquitoes. Ticks, which carry their own catalog of serious diseases. Flies that transmit bacterial infections, biting midges, sandflies, the entire category of small insects that in the pre-antibiotic world could turn a minor skin irritation into a fatal infection, had one consistent weakness. They hated smoke. Sleeping in it wasn't a failure of comfort optimization. It was a sophisticated, empirically validated, multi-generational medical intervention that required no understanding of germ theory to produce real results. You didn't need to know what a parasite was. You just needed to notice that the people who slept in the smoke got sick less often, that the children who grew up closest to the fire survived at higher rates, that the elders who had spent decades wrapped in wood smoke every night were still alive to be elders. Natural selection did the rest. The behavior that kept people healthiest got passed forward. The people who found smoke uncomfortable and slept at a distance left fewer descendants to inherit that preference. Over thousands of generations, the humans who remained got selected for a relationship with fire and smoke that looks, from the outside, almost irrational. Sleeping in conditions that would make a modern person deeply uncomfortable, by choice, in warm weather, night after night. It wasn't irrational. It was the opposite. It was one of the most effective public health interventions in human history, implemented without institutions, without science, without any conscious understanding of why it worked. Just the accumulated signal of who survived and who didn't, written into behavior across enough generations that it stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like instinct. And here's where it gets personal. Because this isn't just ancient history sitting safely in the past. Every summer, millions of Americans go camping. They build fires they don't need for warmth. They sit close to them in 70-degree weather, closer than is strictly comfortable, watching flames they could easily live without. They feel something around those fires that is genuinely difficult to articulate. A settling. A quieting of whatever runs loud and anxious in the modern mind. A sense that this, specifically this, is somehow right in a way that's hard to explain. That feeling has a history 400,000 years long. The predators are gone, or at least fenced out. The mosquitoes are manageable. The knowledge transmission happens on devices in your pocket now, rather than in stories spoken across flames. The reasons that made nighttime fire non-negotiable for survival have been replaced one by technology and infrastructure and electric light. But the pull remains, unchanged, unreduced, stubbornly present in a brain that evolved in firelight and apparently never entirely updated its priors. When you sit close to a summer fire and feel that specific, wordless sense of rightness, you are not being sentimental. You are not being primitive. You are running ancient software on modern hardware, feeling the echo of every ancestor who ever made it through the night because they stayed close to the flames. The fire kept them alive, and somewhere underneath everything, your nervous system still knows it.